Hello, everybody. Welcome back if you've already been joining us for our documentary day Q&As at Northampton Film Festival. So yeah, we've had a bit of an epic day with Q&As from all sorts of places. This evening, I am joined by Paul Williams. We've got 2 of his documentaries that are screening at the festival. And exciting news is that we're going to be extending them because we're a drama feature film production company ourselves, but we have had such interest in the documentaries that we thought, you know what, let's show them for the whole festival. So they're all available if you're watching this live or recently recorded, and they're all available to the end of Wednesday, the 19th of May. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Paul in. Hello, Paul. How are you?
Hello, I'm very well. Thank you very much.
Good. So where in the world are you joining us from?
I'm in the sunny tropics of Abington.
Exciting times.
So I am, so I could kind of, if I had a really good throw, which I don't, but I could throw a ball from my back garden into the county cricket ground.
Amazing. Well, and so so obviously we're showing kind of 2 of your films at the moment, but do you want to kind of give us where did this all start for you?
Oh, how far do you want me? So,
oh no, I love. Okay, so usually I start my story with what I wanted to do at school. So I'd love to start there, to be honest.
What I wanted to do at school was leave.
Okay, yeah, fine.
I was not a good student, and funnily enough, it's my 13-year-old son is presently enduring the academy system at the moment, and I'm not the greatest at encouraging, other than dissent. Join Fridays for Future and then start Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays, strikes. But no, I wasn't a good student, and I've very much taken the autodidact route. But things really kind of, after kind of leaving school and doing any job I could get my hands on, really, I'm doing kind of city and guild stuff in engineering and at the very low end of it, welding and things like. Well, not to say that welding is not a great career path. You earn for it sometimes, just something relatively easy to do. But I found myself in Boston, Massachusetts, via one route or another, and stayed there for some years and kind of dropped out, really. And as in Spinal Tap, it says, Boston, it's not a very big college town. For somebody in their early 20s bumming around, being the college town that it is, what with Harvard and MIT and Boston College and Boston University, you could kind of just scrape by living on people's couches. you know, and I was kind of the eccentric English guy that appeared on a couch to party and was still there a month later. And but I met some brilliant people, had some hair-raising experiences, and at a particular party I met a chap called Timothy Fickner, who to this day is one of my dearest friends, who was running a very lo-fi underground art gallery in Boston, in the North End, the Italian Quarter. And it was really kind of the only lo-fi outsider kind of jest-making gallery outside New York, really, and on the East Coast. And I just found my people for the first time, really, with Timothy, and things opened up. You know, I was 21 or something, and 22, and you know, that was the first time I found, you know, that there was this thing called Dada had existed, you know, in the early 100 and something years before, and you know, that just opened my eyes to a number of things. And then I discovered Alfred Jarry and his plays about the Ubu plays, and then kind of realized that, you know, art could be fun, and it could be incomprehensible, it could be anything you wanted to be, really. And with those people, I just started reading a lot, doing a lot of different kind of things, and then got into various sorts of scrapes and things that I'm glad aren't on any kind of. I don't have, when I go back to the States now, you know, I don't have to tick certain boxes that I may have done if certain things, if they'd have caught me. But you know, I got back to England and then met my now ex-wife Sophie here by meeting up. You know, came to Northampton because my father was working at Cosworth at the time as a Formula One design engineer, and you know, I got back from being in America, and Northampton, you know, just seemed a bit too slow, but it was great. You know, there was Slurps down Bridge Street existed, which was absolutely a wonderful hub of Northampton's underbelly. You know, it was you know, I met people like Pat Fish there, who's, you know, the jazz butcher, who's a dear friend of mine, and all the people around that kind of scene, and reading poetry out, you know, bad poetry, and trying to be Allen Ginsberg and things like that. And I'd only just started trying to learn to play the guitar then, but it was, you know, there was some good things going on in Northampton, it seemed. But very quickly, I mean, after meeting Sophie, on Pat's recommendation, we moved to Hamburg in Germany, and all sorts of things went on, you know, after a few years of just trying to make music, playing in bars, doing things completely lo-fi, you know, completely without any money, without any hope, you know, very little ambition, but just to kind of keep going, really. And it was great. And again, we met a huge load of incredibly wonderful people who are still very much a part of our life. And then we started having children and things, but all the time, you know, picking up kind of energies about DIY, do-it-yourself culture, and getting involved in setting up clubs and putting on shows and gigs and things like that. And then a turning point in that part of the journey. I mean, Sophie and I then started having our family. So we had our oldest, Molly, who is now 23, was born in Hamburg. But I, just by chance, a friend of mine was a tour manager, a gig promoter, and was completely without any money and not really knowing what to do. And he said, "Oh, why don't you go on tour with this band US Maple? Drive them around Europe." And that, for me, just that experience of doing that with those guys just changed everything, you know, because it was kind of, I then got plugged in. They were a Chicago so-called kind of no wave band. I mean, it was not really the genre. I ended up calling it smart ass music, you know. They're absolutely fantastic performative rock and roll experience, you know, of something, you know, it's not the Rolling Stones, it's not AC/DC, it's something kind of other, you know, from Chicago. And that opened up a whole new load of friends and contacts and things like that. I did one more tour after that with the great and marvelous Bobby Conn. But that really did set me, or set things up for what was gonna come, because through that contact, a few handshakes on, was the reason that Tony Conrad ended up coming to the Fish Market, which, as I say, there was the life before Tony and life after it. But also there was life before the Fish Market, and life after it. It was a fantastic thing, you know, and something that you know, could only in many ways happen in Northampton. I mean, you know, Jane West, my dear friend Westy, who was the main kind of force behind that coming into being, you know, how she achieved what she did with that place, actually, you know, getting it to the point of opening the doors was something I still am amazed at. You know, her ability to kind of to play the politics of the town, to understand the politics of the town and how it works. You know, I mean, who can do that?
Well, yes, it continues to be, you know, we go, as you know, it's a period of change, isn't it? But I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, and you know, that process of when she invited me to come and help out in one way or another, however I could, with that venue, you know, coming from working in a venue in Hamburg and seeing so many different things, you know, all the way back to the working with Timothy at the Speedway in Boston. You know, you could apply, you know, this kind of empirical knowledge of how to try and find an audience, to entertain an audience, to make sure they, you know, they might come back again, you know, to you know, or to kind of resist an audience to make sure that they never came back again, whatever it is the work demanded. But that was a great experience because, you know, being on the kind of, not board of that, but on the kind of committee, you know, worked with some fantastic people. Ursula Wright, who was such a wonderful, wonderful inspiration, you know, to me and to everybody else that had the privilege to be around the late Ursula. You know, but from trying to make things happen there, you know, you were part of the kind of well, you were kind of running through the veins of the town. You know, it was a fascinating thing, and met so many and more great people. But then when we managed to get Tony to come and play, you know, that was, yeah, for me it changed everything, and then really caused me to get involved in film. I often say, you know, completely by mistake.
I know a lot of people that have, I think there's a few things. I think people come to film completely by mistake because actually half of us, and I include myself in this, just aren't aware what opportunity there is. We've never maybe got our hands on a camera. We've never seen what the industry is like. And so, I mean, I got into film entirely by mistake as well. And I think you meet a lot of people who don't realise the skills they have are what film needs. But yeah, so you had so Tony Conrad came to the Fish Market, and you'd not made any kind of film before, and film wasn't really on your radar at all.
No, but I was actually, it's all a bit of a blur to me, the dates, you know. It's quite funny. But I'd also, I had an experience of film in a very kind of profound and deep way, in fact, but I never felt it was kind of a part of anything that could be connected to anything else, because I worked with the great auteur and eccentric actor that is Crispin Glover for a while. And that came about because, you know, he of Back to the Future, and you know, he played George McFly in Back to the Future. He was the tall, thin man in the reboot of the Charlie's Angels things, Bartleby. I mean, God knows. I mean, I think the thing that he's in at the moment, people may know, is American Gods on Amazon. But anyway, great, wonderful human being in many, many ways. You know, I thought, you know, I didn't have much to do. I thought I need to travel. You know, had 2 children at that point, and I thought, how do I get out for a bit? So I thought, how do I get back into touring? And there was no way back into it at a level that would have interested me. And I'd remembered a story that Timothy Fichtner from the Boston days had told me many, many times about being involved, and I think it was the second ever screening Crispin did of his films, where he did a performance and a Q&A. I think he just maybe even did a performance at that time, but he made his own films. You know, one is called What Is It, and the other is called Everything Is Fine, It Is Fine, or It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine, one of the two. And I looked him up just to see what he'd be up to, and he was still touring these films, you see. So he would only show the films on 35mm prints. He would do a reading of his books at the beginning, an hour, films an hour, Q&A an hour. Right, big event, yeah. Only for the dedicated, not for the faint-hearted. And so I got in touch with him and said, "You've never been to the UK before. How about we do something?" And we ended up doing a UK tour, which pretty much sold out. And it was one hell of an experience working with him. Really, it was. My Lord, that man is a force of nature. And, you know, but his stories that he'd tell in the Q&As about his relationship with the film industry, you know, with why he wasn't involved in the second Back to the Future, was because they you know, he fell out with couldn't come to terms with the deal with the producers, and they ended up using prosthetic moldings of his face on other actors, which he then sued and won, which set precedents for image rights.
I did not know that.
Yeah, but his stories about then kind of how that affected his film career are really, really quite dark. You know, and you know, because he went up against Steven Spielberg and these other people and won, and so it was. So he and I then he bought a chateau in the Czech Republic to turn into a film studio, and I got involved in trying to kind of make that work with him, which again was another one of these kind of experiences of how does culture work from the point of view of setting something up unique that's there to teach, to inspire, to give low budget resources to you know, but to be really pursuing the crossing of boundaries that nobody'd ever gone over before, and things like that with the medium you're working with. It was really, for me, it was just, you know, it's one of the projects that if it had worked, you know, but it didn't, and there was magic in the failure.
There's always that's a great phrase, actually. We're always going on about magic in the failure. I'm going to use that. I'm stealing that. Thank you very much.
It taught me. I can't remember who said this to me, or I might have come up with it myself, or it might have been Crispin, it might have been somebody around that world. But it kind of made it clear to me that what I was after was less of the kind of transactional and more transformational. You know, I wanted my mind blown. You know, it's like with you know, which started with Timothy back in Boston with the Speedway Gallery. The stuff that he was doing, I didn't know existed. You know, I grew up in a little village in Hampshire. You know, I'm one of the few people, I didn't really like John Peel. You know, it was just too much for me. I was living in an idyllic kind of, you know, village with a stream running outside. You know, what was Throbbing Gristle going to do to me? You know,
yeah,
you know, and it really did something. You know, it hits you kind of right in the profundities, and yeah, Crispin's way of going about things, that, as I say, that deep level of insight into really how the business works, you know, was great. And again, when Tony turned up in Northampton, here was one of the heavyweights of the contemporary art world who really knew their stuff. You know, I mean, from starting off as a computer scientist in the late 50s, you know, being part of that New York scene all the way through the 60s, and inspiring people like Andy Warhol, you know, and the great line that I think Mike Kelly came up with. I don't think it was for Tony, but it works for Tony, is the minor histories. You know, it's these stories underneath. You know, it's like, and I always kind of talked about it in terms of the minor histories, those histories on which the major histories stand on the shoulders of, you know. And here was Tony. He was one of these people, because you were most likely, if you were in any way creative at any endeavor, you'd have been inspired by Tony in one way, shape or form. And here he was, he turned up in Northampton. I went to pick him up at Heathrow Airport, you know, and nothing was the same ever again. First thing he said to me was, do you know the way home in the car? And I said, yes. He said, go a different way.
Oh yeah, you see, that's already making my hands go a bit sweaty. You know, you can tell from hearing about your background and what obviously excites you with the kind of films that you make. And I think anyone who's not watched the films will probably get a really good sense of obviously what stories make you tick. I mean, what was it like filming the Tony Conrad documentary?
Well, when I got involved in that, because after meeting Tony and how much a kind of a kick in the pants he gave me. I mean, he'd been gone a couple of years, really, I suppose, and I'd been listening to the music and I'd been reading stuff. And then for another project that went by the wayside, thankfully, I had to go to Los Angeles for the first time for a big business meeting with somebody down in Century City up on the 50th floor, you know, and I would, just before I was going to embark on that trip, I was doing, I think I did a Google on Tony Conrad, and a little video I found a little video called Pythagoras in the Park, which was about Tony in New York, talking about his relationship with about his whole theories around Pythagoras, which is hilarious. I mean, you can just Google it, write it down, Google it after this. It's in the film, but that piece in itself is just genius, and it just made me howl. That's somebody captured the real true Tony. And I did a Google on the person that put it up, and there he was. He was a filmmaker. He was the editor of Devil and Daniel Johnson, the documentary about the outsider artist Daniel Johnson. And he was fascinating. And I got in touch with him and said, I'm going to be in LA in a few weeks. Could we get together? Because I've met Tony too. And so we did meet. I had a terrible hangover. And we got on like we just kind of, we were buddies straight away. And he showed me some stuff that he'd shot and told me the story. And he'd already at that time been shooting Tony since 97, I think was the first film, I think. It was 96. It was when Tony did his first gig with Faust since the 70s, and Tyler was there to shoot this. That's how it started for him, and nobody was helping him. And I said, well, I don't know how I can help, but I'm in. And 6 or 7 years later, the film was finished. But it was quite a journey because I didn't know, you know, he'd say, well, I've got a synopsis. And I'd say, well, what does that entail? Short something? He said, yes. Well, show me what that is. I've got a treatment. Do you? What for what ailment?
Yeah.
You know? And I didn't know anything. And Tyler is a master of his craft, and he is the most patient, decent, intelligent, thoughtful person, you know, you'll ever meet in the, you know, editors. I mean, those that spread magic, you know, with their hours spent doing something that, you know, it's the great line that, you know, is adapted line from Pat Fish. You know, he does all the work so we don't have to, right?
Yeah.
It's that and it was a privilege working with Tyler on getting that film finished. You know, because I was then watching the rushes of interviews, helping him transcribe things, talking about, you know, what that interview was, what was missing in the film, you know, what we were trying to achieve with it. We did, you know, with the wonderful Northampton cultural impresario that is Barry Hale from Threshold. We did an installation at their festival in Lincoln. What's that called? Do you remember what it's called? Barry, kill me for forgetting what.
Yes, no, yes. Oh no, put me on the spot now as well. No, I don't know, but yes, it always looks very impressive.
Yeah, so we kind of, because at that time we only had all these vignettes that Tyler had shot of the Tony film, and it was, you know, he'd go on a shoot and he'd come home from the shoot, and he then, as an editor, he just condense that shoot that he'd been on down to what was usable. You know, with Tony, that was always something, you know, just, you know, one of his ideas. He'd be on camera, and one of his ideas, he'd just, from beginning to end, this idea would come out, and there it was. Little vignette. And we had, I don't know, 20 or so of those, which what Tyler did when he came to edit, just when we decided, right, now's the time to finish the film, which is when he met my fellow producer on that project, the marvelous Christine Beebe, who became the mother of the project, the kick-ass of the project. She said, right, we're going to finish it, boys. You know.
It's the hardest thing of filmmaking, actually, to finish something.
Yeah. And when Christine says you're going to finish it, you finish it. And so we ended up doing it. But what he then did, you know, it's then putting all those vignettes together. And, you know, I've been to his studio in LA, and it's, you know, Post-it notes. It's one of the, you know, editors and directors and people have very different ways of compiling their film. Tyler's a Post-it note, you know, on the wall. And, you know, when he said, right, I've got a cut, I'm going to send it to you, you know, and it'd be like, oh, fantastic. Get a couple of bottles of wine in, get ready to watch it. And I think it was 2 hours, 40 minutes. And I said, that's done. It was fantastic. But then we went on this journey that was what I call, you know, taking it from being the filmmaker's film to being the audience's film. And that, I learned so much from that, you know, because Tyler would then go, you know, make notes, do this, do that to it, and then gather a load of people, show it to them, you know, people that didn't know who Tony was, people that really knew who Tony was, people that didn't know documentary, people that did, really knew it, you know, people like that, and then just gather everything you can out of it, do another cut, take, you know, and off. And we did that for probably nearly a year, you know, and it you know, you can tell, you know, that it went through that interrogation, you know, and that's what I can always tell in a doc now if they haven't applied that much attention to the editing, to that process. Yeah. But a lot of people, you just can't afford it. You know, it's a very difficult thing. That with the Tony film, there was, Tyler would you know, goes into sweats when it's when we actually do talk about how much money it cost. But it was his own money, and he worked his ass off to get that money, and by making other people's films, and to make sure that it was the document about the person, the true document about the subject, the best you could possibly do. And we had a lot of emotional and artistic integrity and desire to do that to the best of our abilities, and it was a privilege to be involved as one's first film.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was, and then be given the task of doing the distribution and finding people to watch it, because I'd never done that before, and of course, and that's what Tony would have liked the most.
Mm-hmm.
He hated experts.
Yeah.
Well,
yes, and so I mean, since then, talking of distribution, that's kind of something that you've gone into as well. Actually, there's one thing making the films, and it's equally, as you say, it's so important that we get them to people. So tell us a bit about kind of burning bridges and what you do.
Yeah, well, it started with the Tony film. I mean, there was nobody else that was going to do it, and there was nobody else that was going to do it with the love that we applied with, Tyler and I applied to it. And to do it, basically, it was funny. We got it. I mean, Tony passed away about a month before we finished it. The proper, real, true final cut, and which was, we'd already had the premiere booked in Chicago at the Chicago Underground Film Festival. And Tony was supposed to go and be there at that event and collect a Lifetime Achievement Award, which he was going to turn down, and because he wasn't dead yet, and of course he was. So we all collected it with masks of Tony in front of us. But anyway, that was the first event, and we'd been emailed by a lovely little festival in south of France, in Perpignan, called FILAF, FILAF. I encourage anybody to look it up. It's a fantastic little boutique film festival, and people were going, "You can't do that. You've got to go for the next big festivals, and this has got to have this kind of run." And we thought, no, just go where the love is. And that really worked for that film. I mean, Tyler came over for that. That was about a few weeks after Chicago, with Andy, a friend that's in the film, who was doing a project about the paper aeroplanes of Harry Smith and the collections and things. We just had a fantastic time, and it was just proof. You just go where the love is with getting booked. You strategies and all of that kind of stuff. Fine if you have budgets, and they need justifying and they need spending in the right way. But we didn't have that, and we were distributing then a film about Tony Conrad. How would he do it? Yeah, he'd be on to something else. He just wouldn't do it. And so I just wanted to learn how it did, and so I just followed the love, and that's how Burning Bridges. I think I was already calling it that by then, but it was. But it was like, it was, the whole ethos behind what I try and do is to burn the bridge between the project and BS. To nonsense, to complications, to just get on and do it. And that film, is a kind of a template, really, with how not to do things, as Tony would say. But what we achieved. Tyler said to me, "Can we get a premiere, a great premiere in LA, his hometown? Can we get one in London? Can we get one in Berlin, because I've never been there before? And what else was it? There was a couple of other places anyway, which we did achieve. And but in Berlin, LA, it was sponsored by the Broad Museum, so they spent a huge amount of money on it. Henry Rollins did the Q&A. King Gordon played the show out with making new work. In Berlin, we did it with Stephen O'Malley from Sun, you know, who played a blistering set with members of Einstürzen and Neubaum making new music. And so what we ended up doing was showing this film, and new work was being created on the back of it. So that really has informed nearly, you know, what everything that I try and do now with the events, which of course we haven't been able to do. But even, you know, then setting up the streaming platform, which we did recently, because we'd never released the Tony film on the internet. So we thought, well, it's lockdown, let's do it.
Absolutely.
And then that went the way it did. And then my dear friend Paul Williams, who's made the KLF film Welcome to the Dark Ages, which you have, you know, I'd got involved. That was finished when I got involved, but nothing was licensed.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah. So, I mean, yes.
I started, you know, Paul was just like, look, can you help? You know, and I think that's the thing with about this type and the type of filmmaking, of distributions, you know, at the end. But it's like a tag team, isn't it? You know, no to low to micro budget filmmaking. It's a tag team thing. It was like the Molotov Club back in Hamburg. It was like the fish market. You know, you get worn out, and you just have to have somebody to say, "You give it a go."
Yeah.
You know, yeah. And that's what it's like, and it's, you know, and also if you apply that, you know, I say if you can make a film without any money, and you can be, you know, you're in from the very beginning, you see it all the way through to the point where it is presented on a screen and people sit and go, wow, that's really good. You will have learned through that process, from the beginning to that moment, levels of humility that I don't think any other artistic endeavor can give you, you know, challenge you with.
Yeah.
You know, and in a way, that's what's kind of hooked me. You know,
yeah.
And Tony always said, he said to me, you're the kind of person, he said, that should always be out of your depth. Once you know how you know that you know what you're doing, but you never know in documentary what you're doing.
No, I mean, you know, and hopefully, you know, you're not in control of what you're doing in a way, because it's not it's someone else's story that you're following, and who knows where it's going to go. And yeah,
especially if the people that, you know, I mean, once you know, and I love this process of telling stories about, you know, what I love the most is art, music, culture in general, because, and especially if you're dealing with people like Tony Conrad, you know, you've got to get your head around some pretty radical political, philosophical, societal theory and process. You know, you really have to kind of get into this. You know, I mean, through Tony getting it, you know, trying to learn about John Cage and things like this. I mean, I'm Tony, I am out of my depth, believe me, you know. And then with Paul and the KLF thing, it was he'd made a good film. He'd also made another film with Bill Drummond, which was at that time released. What Time Is Best Before Death, which was about Bill's world tour and of art making, and it was a lovely film. But this one was kind of, you know, not being considered so well and not being given any love, and, you know, and hadn't got all the clearances done. And so Paul and I set about doing that, which one knows, you know, certain pathways to very deep levels of humility, you know, when you're dealing with Warner and Universal and things like that, and they're throwing these arbitrary figures at values of music, which may have that value if indeed, you know, Steven Spielberg's on the end of the phone, you know, but not here, doesn't, you know. So you have to go through this process of, you know, I can't give the figures, but they were up here, the figures that were first quoted. We ended up paying figures way down there.
Yeah. But did you get everything that you needed, or did that?
We did, you know, because the film's out. And also Bill and Jimmy didn't want the film released you know, I think they wanted it destroying like their £1 million. But again, you know, we had some great meetings, long meetings, and you'd go in and it'd be great, and you'd learn some really hang out, and, you know, Bill and Jimmy, and you'd come out, and Paul and I would go to the pub with Nick Franco, the producer and dear friend, and then you'd say, what happened there then? We didn't talk about what we, you know.
Yeah.
I was surprised. It's Bill and Jimmy. And but we ended up figuring it out after months and months and tag team and, you know, different conversations meaning different things. And I think, and that for me is it keeps one's you know, the best of one's abilities, you know, oiled and practiced, which is just this, you know, and it's, I mean, who knows what it is, but it's resilience and, you know, and a kind of a commitment to giving the film as best what it deserves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's kind of, yeah, it's interesting because, you know, obviously we're talking to a lot of people as various Q&As of this that, you know, are very commercially minded, you know, and everything else. And, you know, we make films kind of in a commercial space, but we're a non-profit. And so we've kind of released ourselves a little bit from some of the things that people expect you to do with films. And it is lovely sometimes just to, let's just do what's right for the film. Maybe that's following the love, maybe it's not, whatever. But I like that ethos because it.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, and I mean, I am now a commercial filmmaker on part of my practice. I have to be, right? But I've come through it very slowly in some ways, and without, you know, compromise, because because nobody else was offering me anything. You know, my dear friend Tim Harries here of this parish said to me, you know, you play on a field of one. And I'm completely fine with that. Who else would want to play on this field? I mean, who else is bonkers enough, you know, to get involved in these things in this way? Well, there is enough people, but, you know, you're in your own little universes when you're making these things, aren't you? And you have to, and once you're in, you know, you can get out if you like, but usually with these kind of things, the stakes can become quite high quite quickly. I mean, case in point was the Shirley Collins film that we made. We embarked on that. I mean, that came because of the Tony, in one way, shape or form, because of the Tony exhibition that we did with Barry out in Lincoln, because a friend of mine saw it and said, you know, are you going to do this again? And I said, well, I haven't even finished that one yet. What? He said, well, if you do, there's a great story in the folk singer Shirley Collins. And I had no idea who she was and did my homework, talked to Tim, because Tim had played bass for many years with Steel Eye Span, with June Tabor, with the, you know, he knew that, you know, he had a pass to the folk, to the, you know, the Royal Folk Box, you know, at Cecil Sharp House, God help us, but and told me all of these wonderful things about her and the story and what to expect from them and all of that, and so then by chance, because of Sophie going to college with Tim Plester, who was the co-director of the film, introduction, all these things came together. We met Shirley. We decided there was this wonderful film to be made about a singer that lost their voice, so therefore the thing that defined them. We thought it's about England, it's about history, it's about identity, it's about place, all of these really wonderful things that it was time for me to learn, because I'd lived, you know, in America for some years, I'd lived in Germany for some years. I didn't really, in a way, feel British, English at all, and or know anything about why you might want to feel those things. And here was the opportunity, and very quickly it became that this singer who lost their voice was going to do everything that she could at 80 years old to find it again. You know, and once that happens, you better stay in, you know, because you know, the Queen wants her throne back, and she got it. You know, and we played a part in that, you know, and but it had its cost, deep cost.
Okay.
You know, Tim said to me, if you end up doing this film, there will be blood.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you know, I think kind of what was, you know, what you've said is people. At the end of the day, you've got to do what you love or what you can justify to yourself, or you know what drives you. And I think the only person really at the end of the day that you've got to be okay with is yourself, and whether how much you give up, how much you don't give up, how much you pursue things you love versus just doing things for other reasons. And it's at the end of the day, it is just you. You have to justify it too, isn't it?
Exactly, you know, and the team you put together. I mean, I love collaborations. You know, I mean that's the thing about filmmaking that. You know, it's like the early, you know, my first experience and ability to witness the kind of machinations of the making of a film. Crispin was very clearly to me not what I wanted. You know, the auteur, you know, doing everything that he possibly could to make everybody's life a misery because his vision, you know, was going, you know, was the great best. It didn't matter what else. When you're doing these kind of films that I like to make, and be involved in, it's not that, you know, it's a collaborative, you know, effort, as I say, with great levels of humility, patience, love, you know, skill, luck, all of the things that you need to make a good documentary, you know, and you may get paid. You just may.
Yeah.
I mean, interestingly, right now, the first film for a national broadcast is actually just having its TV premiere right now. Started at 9 o'clock on Sky Arts.
Oh, exciting! Give that a little plug.
Yeah. Overshadowed, the Matt Dayton story.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, brilliant.
Matt Dayton, who was in the wonderful band Mother Earth back in the day, and it's a beautiful little film, and it's part of Mental Health Awareness Week because of his. It's a tribute, you know, to an artist who's suffered from, you know, such acute levels of mental health, mental illness, but his how he deals with it and his music and all. It's a beautiful little film. Yeah.
Oh, great. And what is next for you? What's the next film project?
Well, we are deep into a wonderful feature about the Jamaican pioneer of dub music, King Tubby.
Okay.
That's about 60% shot. We're pitching it for completion money and partnerships, distribution, and all of that. Next month at the Israeli CoPro festival, thankfully online. Don't think travel would be sensible. So that's with an Israeli filmmaker, Ariel Tagar. So we hope that can get finished next year. That'll be it's great. It'll be a great film if we get it finished.
You say if.
Oh, we will get it finished.
Yeah,
but maybe not next year.
No, okay.
And there's quite a large number of things that I can't really talk about.
No, fair enough. That's always a good way to be. To be fair, it's nice to have a few little secrets up the sleeve.
Yeah. But we, you know, branching, you know, into doing the first things as TV commissions. But you know, in some ways, it's a double-edged sword when the BBC are interested. You know.
Well, yes, I was going to say, how would you find, I could imagine, you know, doing stuff like Tony Conrad film over, I think you said 6 years or something.
22 years, yeah, for me, 6 years.
You know, and then get commission from a broadcaster. I assume that's a whole different way of working, different kettle of fish.
Yeah. So work with somebody that knows how to do it.
Is that always good? Or? Yeah,
I have a wonderful relationship with a production company. They're based out of Soho and Derry in Northern Ireland called Alleycat TV. My friend Ed Stobart, who runs that, is a very experienced, pragmatic force of nature. So I kind of stand behind him and look over his shoulder. So I'm kind of doing development work with them, bringing projects, and we've got one that's gone through the various levels, and of course the BBC's just had a big shake-up. So that hopefully that will go through, which is a kind of an art murder whodunit, which I'm really, it's a very, very wonderful story. And then there's a big project around trying to the good news stories around what's happening within engineering and innovation to get society to a net zero carbon emissions world, which I'm really excited about. Got a big project with a big drum and bass label and an anniversary year, which hopefully we're going to production with soon. So there's lots and lots to do. Wow. And then with the Burning Bridges streaming, we've got many films, various different types of films, wonderful experimental documentaries, shorts and features coming up. And then hopefully when the world can get back to rights, we can start doing some events. And so we're kind of planning something in January now with a friend of mine's film, Desolation Centre, which was kind of, it'll be on Burning Bridges next year, but you can find it now. It's out everywhere. Desolation Centre, which is about the desert, punk rock desert gigs in the LA desert.
Right, okay.
Back in the 80s, which basically started off, it was the inspiration to Coachella and Burning Man.
Yeah.
Like that with and we're going to do some events with that hasn't been seen in cinemas, and it needs to. And what we want to do with that is to use it as a inspiration to and thanks in a way, or homage to the local gig promoter. Because of course in Northampton, everybody watching this, if you've been to a gig in Northampton, everybody knows Andy Skank, right? Everybody knows Andy Skank. If you don't know Andy Skank, Becky, you need to get back to Northampton, or the Labour Club. He started that kind of.
Okay, yeah.
And so every town has an Andy Skank, or if they don't, they need one.
Yeah.
And so because this is a kind of an LA story of a promoter who, for one reason or another, was being clamped down on and couldn't put the shows on that the people wanted, he started doing them in the desert, and then that inspired all of the.
Right. Okay.
Stuff now, and then he became and Stuart became then I think he's turned one of the most dangerous book publishers in the world. So there's a great story there. So what we want to do is to kind of, and especially I think as we emerge out of lockdown and need to go and see things, and need to go and see different types of things, from low budget experimental things to going back to the Enormo Dome and seeing a Enormo group, you need the whole structure, you need the whole gambit, right? And it's local DIY gig promoters that are the kind of, give the spark to community, I think. And so that's what we want to do, is then go to a town, find who the promoter is, and maybe try and inspire some local people, make a film or something.
Amazing. Well, I feel like, in these times, as people keep saying, supporting that local, music community and everything else is so vital. Amazing. Well, it sounds like you've got loads of really exciting things on the cards, and I just want to end with a little weird question. Bit of it's the theme of our film festival. Northampton, kind of a big deal?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's the centre of the universe.
Yay! Yeah. Yeah, I think I've said that in every Q&A we've done so far. I'm going to make that my mission now, I think, to say that, Northampton is the centre of the universe.
I mean, you've just got to buy Jerusalem, Alan's book, Jerusalem, and it's the handbook, right?
Yeah.
And it tells it as it is.
Yeah, fabulous. Well, we'll leave it on that note. Thank you very much, Paul. I really enjoyed both documentaries. I watched, actually, the Tony Conrad one back before we were planning the 2020 festival, which obviously we didn't have. Well,
I can't thank you enough for inviting me, and if anybody's in the local film scene has, if I can help in any way, or you think you can come and work with me, or have ideas, or please never hesitate.
No, great. Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, I will let you get back to your Friday night, and maybe you can watch a bit of your premiere if I let you go quickly enough.
Oh no, I've seen that too many times. I shall now imbibe.
Yes,
Thank
go
you.
for it.
Cheers,
Thank
everyone.
you very much. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.